How's it going, my welding family? Once again here, Rosendo Rodriguez, welding fly deck, here with WeldTube in Houston, Texas. Now, in today's video, we have a very special guest. His name is Keegan. He is with Kentucky Welding Institute. On this video, he's going to show us how to do a 6G monster coupon test. Okay, but most important, he's going to teach us how to weld it fast. Okay, so he's going to be doing a combo and a TIG out. You don't want to miss out, so stay tuned.
And check out the Kentucky Welding Institute. With 25 plus certifications offered, tons of financial aid including FAFSA and VA benefits. Graduate quickly and earn maximum pay fast. Links down below.
What's up, guys? It's Keegan from the Kentucky Welding Institute. I've been traveling and welding across the country for different companies and contractors and welding on different metals and materials such as Inconel chrome, copper, nickel, stainless, super duplex. Today, I'm going to be sharing with you how I take my monster coupon tests, and I'm going to be doing it fast. The reason being is companies and contractors want you to weld fast on jobs, and if you can do that, they'll always be calling you back. So my goal today is to share with you how I've been taking my weld test and how I keep getting phone calls to come back on these jobs. Let's get it. Alright guys, so I've already prepped my monster coupons, and today I'm going to be sharing with you the two most common types of monster tests that you'll take, which is going to be a TIG out monster coupon and a combo monster coupon. Now, with these two tests, I'm going to be doing two different types of techniques for the root. For one test, I'll be doing a backfeed technique. The other test, I'll be doing a lay wire technique. So for this combo monster right here, I'm going to do a backfeed technique, which is what I normally do on weld tests. I'll be using an 1/8 inch gap and 332 wire. Now, I like to use an 1/8 inch gap and 332 wire because the less gap you have, the quicker the weld goes. And the bigger the gap you have, the longer it takes to weld that. So I'm going to go ahead and tack this with 332 wire with an 1/8 inch gap. Now, my temperature is about 115 amps. You always want to run a little bit hotter when you have a tight gap. Now, it's taken me several years to figure out that with a tighter gap, you can weld faster. On most jobs nowadays, I usually do about an 1/8 inch gap on most alloys and materials, and then to run 332 wire. So I'm going to go ahead and put my first tack in here. And I always add wire on each side of the bevel before I bridge it. A lot of guys, they'll try to bridge one whole side, and then it just falls out in the center of the root. So now I'm going to pick it up, I'm going to look at it, I'm going to open it up some, make sure my wire fits in there good. There's a little bit of bang in there. Get that right where I want it. All right, so I got my gap opened up the way that I want it. I'm gonna go ahead and tack this other side directly on the opposite side. Now, I only put 2 tacks in my weld test, and that's really all you need. Now, if you're doing a weld in the field, you wanna put usually 4 tacks to keep it from drawing. So I'm gonna go ahead and tack this thing up here in the 6G position. Now, a lot of times, you know, you're by yourself in a testing lab, and you really don't have anybody to help you tack it up. So what I do is crank this thing up to about, 160, 170, and then I will tack it to the stand. And you're just going to fuse it. It doesn't take much to tack it up there. All right. So we have our coupon tacked up. Let's go ahead and put this bead in. All right, guys, now that we have our monster coupon set up, you need to make sure that your whole work area is nice and clean. So you only need to have what you're going to be taking your weld test with. You don't need clutter, you don't need your bag, you don't need anything. TIG rig, stinger, wire cutters, file, grinder, everything you need to get ready to set up and weld. So the less stuff that you have on the table and in your way, it'll make it a whole lot faster for you when you're taking your weld test. All right, guys, so before I take my test, I'm gonna go ahead and feather my top tacks. I usually don't feather my bottom tacks just because I'm already gonna be heating that up and melting the wire into it. But when I come up to the top, I wanna be able to transition into that tack smooth. So I'm gonna go ahead and feather my top tacks on both sides. And you don't need to grind it that much, just a little bit on either side. That way you can tie into your tacks smooth. So let's go ahead and put a root in this thing. All right, guys, so I got my monster coupon tacked up here with an 1/8 inch gap. I'll be using 332 wire. Now, the technique that I'm gonna be doing is a backfeed technique with this 332 wire with a tighter gap. With a tighter gap and 332 wire, you're able to weld faster, and the weld doesn't take as long because you're not trying to fill up a huge gap. And it took me a while to figure that out. So if you can use this technique taking weld tests and also on the job, it's going to speed up everything for you. And this technique and style of welding changed everything for me and allowed me to get faster and better a lot quicker. So what I'm going to be doing is backfeeding from the top with 332 wire around 120 amps. Because with the tighter gap in 332 wire, you can move really fast, but also with that temperature, if you mess up or anything, the heat will make up for your mistakes. So I'll be feeding my wire from the top and then backfeeding my wire all the way around this coupon to the top. With a tighter gap, you don't have to try to weave it left and right and up and down in some crazy, weird motion like a big gap. So these tighter gaps allow you just to soak it up, melt it in there, and that's really all you're doing with putting a root in, is just putting something in there that's a little bit above flush on the inside and connects the two pieces of pipe. Okay, I'm going to feed my wire through the top, down to the bottom. Now I'm going to heat up my tack. You got to heat up that tack to make sure it's liquid. All you're doing is creating a liquid puddle and connecting the two pieces of pipe. So I'm going to be feeding my wire and then connecting that puddle to the two different pieces of pipe. So up and down. I like to move my tungsten top bevel, bottom bevel, top bevel, bottom bevel, top bevel, bottom bevel. Keeping the wire in the puddle, keeping everything nice, liquid, and hot. Keeping everything smooth. And this is the technique that I do with all my alloys, just moving the tungsten up and down, making sure that it is connected, everything is liquid. Because really all you're doing with TIG welding is just creating a liquid puddle and adding wire into it. Don't overthink it. It's not that complicated. You just have to get used to creating a puddle. So I'm getting close to this tack right here, and I'm actually dipping it on the top and bottom, making sure that it's breaking down. All right, so we're finished with that side. We're going to go ahead and pop off and take our fisheye onto the bevel. All right, guys, now that we've got our right side done, I'm going to move over here to my left-hand side. Now, one of the most important things that I've noticed in the welding industry is being able to weld with both hands. So at KWI, we make our students use left and right hand. And what that does for you out in the welding industry, it allows you to never be in a bind. So if you get on a weld, it's in a ditch in a corner somewhere tight, and you have to use your left and right hand, it's going to make you more versatile, and you won't ever have to worry about being in the field and not knowing how to use a specific hand for a weld. Also, your foreman, your GF, your QC is going to notice that you can weld with both hands, and they will always call you for the harder welds on the job, but also they will always be calling you back to go on jobs because they know you can weld with both hands. So I'll be doing this left-hand side with my left hand and making it a lot more easier for me to weld this coupon out rather than bending my back and arms in a crazy position to weld it. It makes it super fluid and easy to weld. So I'm still running at 120 amps. I'm going to be backfeeding this 332 wire in the 1/8 inch gap. Go ahead, fire up. And remember, we're going to heat this tack up. You don't just want to fire straight into it and start adding wire. We're going to get it nice and liquid, and then we're going to add our wire and move up and down, keeping everything nice, warm, liquid, and one fluid motion. And with this 332 wire, I'm feeding it a decent amount. But see, I don't have a big gap that I'm trying to cover up. I'm just melting the knife edge, adding wire, and creating a nice congruent root all the way around. And 332 burns so easily. That's why I love to use it, because you don't have to run very hot to melt this. We're getting close to the tie-in. We're moving really slow here, making sure that we melt right into that tack, up and down, and then we're dabbing wire, making sure that's melting in. So we're finished with this root, and we're going to go ahead and pop off on the bevel. We don't want fish eyes in the root. So that is the left-hand side of this root. It's very quick and a fast motion, and really you only need one piece of wire to do the root. So if you can just have one piece of wire, do the right-hand side, come over here, do the left-hand side, the root should take you no more than 1.5 minutes. So let's go ahead and start with the hot pass. All right, guys, now that we got our root in, and that shouldn't take you no longer than 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes to get that root in, we're gonna go ahead and put our hot pass in. Now, the goal of today's video is to show you guys how to weld these monster coupons fast. And I don't cut my wire, and I freehand everything, and that's faster for me. Now, if you like to walk the cup, or if you like to freehand, it doesn't matter what you like to do as long as it's fast and consistent. So for me, it's gonna be freehand just because I don't have to move my whole body. I can just stay in one spot and put it in. So I'm gonna go ahead, put the hot pass in on this right-hand side. And we're running about 180 amps just to make sure we melt that hot pass in there. So we're running at about 180 amps. making sure everything is nice and liquid. And this hot pass, it don't have to be nothing special or crazy. You're just melting that root in there, making sure everything's tied in and breaking it down. And I like using 332 wire to hot pass because you know, if you're using 1/8 inch wire, sometimes you can get lack of fusion. So this 332 wire is really going to help you to just make sure you melt everything together. All right, and we have reached the top. We're going to go ahead and pop off and get on our left-hand side. All right, guys, so with that same piece of wire, I'm going to go over here to my left-hand side and put the hot pass in. Now, I had to turn it up a little bit just because some machines are different, and 180 on this machine was a little bit cold, so I turned it up about 10 amps to help me melt that wire and move as quickly as I can. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up on the bottom. Make sure you get comfortable. The most important thing about welding and taking tests is that you're comfortable. If you're not comfortable, you're probably going to make a bad weld. So we're going to go ahead and fire up here on the bottom. Yeah, that 190 amps is way smoother. Now, I'm not focusing all my attention right in the center of the root. I'm making sure that I stay to the walls of the bevel, putting most of my heat there and just skimming across the root. Going nice and slow, making sure we're tying into our last pull off. And there we go. And that's how you do your root and your hot pass fast and efficiently. So let's go ahead, get the stick rods and start filling this thing out. All right, guys, now that we got our root and our hot pass done as quick as we can, now we're gonna move on to the 7018. Now, all you need to do your 7018 is a stinger and a file, okay? You don't need a grinder, you don't need a chip and hammer, because a lot of companies don't want you to have a chip and hammer on the pipe welds or on your test. So all you need is a piece of file here, and then we can show you how I do it quickly and efficiently. So I'm going to go ahead and grab my 7018 332. I like to use 332 just because I can control it a lot easier than an 1/8 inch rod on this 2-inch piece of pipe. So I'm going to go ahead and start with my right hand here just to make sure everything is nice and smooth. So I'm going to fire up on the bottom here, just do a dry run. I always do dry runs to make sure that I'm not going to get caught up by anything that's in the way. And we talked about earlier, you want to keep your work area nice and clean. You don't want any clutter or bags in your feet or anything in the way that will stop you from moving fast and efficiently. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up here. I'm at about 90 amps. So we're going to run one bead and cover up that hot pass. Another thing to keep in mind when you're doing your monster test in the 6G position is that you want to keep this rod perpendicular with the pipe the whole time and keep your wrist rotating. You don't want to get to the top and be pushing the 7018. You want to keep the fluid motion and moving with that rod the whole time. So we're going to go ahead and fire up on the bottom with this 332 7018 at 90 amps. And we're going to strike up about an inch above where we're going to start so that we don't blow porosity or anything that is bad at the end of this rod can get into the weld. So let's go ahead and fire up. And we're going to drag back, do a little bit of a circle, and then make sure that we're touching both bevel walls with this 7018. And we're just making sure everything's getting tied in. We're melting that hot pass in with our 7018 bead here. So we're moving up and down, connecting both parts of the bevel with this bead. And it may be uncomfortable at first when you start doing 7018 on these 2-inch monster coupons, but the more you do it, the better you'll be and the less stiff you'll be. A lot of guys, they kind of seem to tense up and be really uncomfortable. But once you do it a lot more, you'll get comfortable with it. All right, guys, so now that we moved over to the left-hand side, I take my file and I just clean off the top and the bottom of my bead. I don't worry about the middle of it because if you take the time to clean this whole thing before you move over here, that's more time that you have to spend on this. So I just hit the top, hit the bottom, go ahead and grab my rod. Now again, at KWI, we make sure that you use your left and your right hand. If you have to come over here and get in a weird position to weld this, it's going to make you a little bit slower. So we use our left hand on the left-hand side with TIG and stick, and that will make you more proficient and you'll be better off in the long run in the welding industry for it. So I'm going to go ahead and fire up on the bottom with the same technique and style, firing up about an inch above where I'm starting, drag back, do a loop, and bring it around. So let's go ahead and start. And we're coming down here to the bottom, doing a loop, going nice and slow, making sure everything's getting tied in the same way that we did it on our right-hand side. We're just moving up and down, making sure to tie into both bevels. So we're gonna come up here to the top, we're getting close, we're tying in, and we're gonna go ahead and pop off. At this point in time, I'm gonna go ahead and file both sides. And sometimes for this first bead, after the hot pass, you may need to take a wire wheel to it because sometimes that flux and the slag just does not want to come off. All right, so now that we got that clean, we're gonna go ahead and move back over to the right-hand side and start with 2 beads. Again, I don't take a wire wheel each pass just because it's stick welding and you're gonna melt whatever tiny dust or a little bit of flux or slag there is gonna be. So I'm gonna go ahead, clean it real quick with a file, jump over and start my 2 beads on the right-hand side. So right now, I don't know how many beads that I'm gonna cap with, but I do know that after this first stick bead, I'm gonna start with 2. So let's go ahead and fire up on the bottom on my right-hand side, running about 92 amps. I turned it up a little because 90 amps on this first fill pass with sticks seemed a little bit cold. So we're gonna go ahead and fire up on 92 amps on the bottom. Same technique that we did earlier. So let's get it. Fire up on the bottom, do a little bit of a circle. Nice and hot, moving up and down. And you wanna put this stick bead halfway on the last bead and then halfway on the bevel. Keeping everything nice and liquid. And again, with these stick rods, you want to keep rotating your wrist to where it's straight up and down when you reach the top. You don't want to be pushing that rod. And we're going to pop off. So now I'm going to stay on this right-hand side. I'm going to take my file, clean it off, and see how it popped off really fast? That's what you want. So I'm going to go ahead and grab a stick rod and continue on this right-hand side while I'm already over here. So I'm going to do the same thing, but just move that bead up 1. So we did 1, and then now we're going to do 2. This is going to be the second one. I'm going to fire up, do a little bit of a circle. And the most important thing about taking weld tests is trying to figure out how you can do everything smooth and efficiently. If you're taking a weld test and you're sitting there trying to figure out what you want to do and where you want to put your beads, it's going to take you a lot longer and you're going to spend more time there at the testing facility. And sometimes being at testing facilities with 50 other welders isn't that enjoyable because everybody's trying to get the QC at the same time. And we're coming up here to the top, making sure that we're rotating our wrist, making sure that everything's melting in there. Now, one of the most important things to understand about filling out a monster coupon or any kind of weld is it doesn't matter how pretty the welds are in the bevel. As long as you are making the welds clean, you're not getting lack of fusion, you're not getting trapped slag, that's okay if it looks ugly because no one's going to see the inside. So as long as it's clean and it'll pass x-ray, it's good to move on. All right guys, so now I'm over here on my left-hand side and I'm going to do the exact same thing I did with those first beads. Clean off the top, clean off the bottom, and we're going to go ahead and fire up. Got my stick rod here, 332, 7018, 92 amps. I'm going to fire up ahead of it and drag back, circle around. Let's get it. All right, so same exact thing. We're just filling up this left-hand side with this stick rod here. Half of the bead on the last bead and then half of the bead on the bevel. All right, we're going to go ahead and pop off, take our file here, clean this weld off. All right, we're going to grab our other 718 here and start with this second pass. All right, we're going to fire up. And again, just trying to do as much as you can in one spot without block welding. And we're going to do one good circle and then pop off. And so now we've got the 2 beads on the left-hand side. I'm going to go ahead and clean everything off, which shouldn't take too long because the beads are out of the bevel a lot more and you can clean them easier. So we got 2 beads over here, 2 beads over here. I'm going to run back over to the right-hand side and run 3 beads. Same motion, cleaning off the top, cleaning off the bottom and just working our way around this pipe as quick as possible, but still keeping that quality there, making sure that you're breaking everything down and making sure that you're making a good weld for that x-ray or for that bend test. So when we go back over to this right-hand side, it is literally the same thing that I've been doing this whole time. So this was 2 beads, now we're going to be running 3 beads, and then 4 beads, and then 5 beads. So it's going to be the same thing back and forth. So we're going to go ahead and time lapse this section of it because it's just repetition. It's just doing it over and over and over again till we flush out and cap this pipe. So let's go ahead and get it. Now, probably one of the most important things to understand about welding in the industry, first starting out, is AWS certifications. A lot of welders out there will say you don't need AWS certifications. And there is a little bit of truth to that. If you've been welding in the industry 6 years like myself, all I have to do is call a superintendent or a foreman and get on a job. But if you're like myself, who didn't have any connections to the industry and didn't know anybody, those AWS certifications are going to help you to get on a job. So that's why at the Kentucky Welding Institute, AWS certifications in welding are so important to us, because those certifications help get your foot in the door for the first couple of years. All right, guys, now that we got our monster coupon flush with a 4-pass, we're gonna go ahead and start on the cap. So I've wire wheeled everything, I've grinded the high spots. Now, this whole time I've been starting on the right-hand side. Now for the cap, I'm gonna start on the left-hand side because I can tie in better with my right. So I'll go ahead and do my whole left-hand side first, and then I'll jump over to this side, grind the bottom, and do my right hand and tie in really well compared to how I would tie in with my left hand. So I'm gonna go ahead and stay on this left-hand side. I kept my temperature the same at 92 amps. I don't like letting the cap cool before I cap it, just because I like keeping everything nice and warm and fluid, and just the weld's a lot better whenever everything's nice and warm. So I don't stop gap to cap. And also, it makes you faster if you don't stop in welds. And also, foremans and companies, they like it whenever you get the welds done and smoke them out. Now, in some situations, if you're welding an alloy, you may have to let it cool, but in a lot of turnaround settings, they just want the welds done as quick as possible. So let's go ahead, fire up with our left hand at 92 amps, stick rod the same, angle the same movements, keeping everything fluid. So let's go ahead and fire up. All right. Now, I'm thinking this is gonna be a 5-bead cap, so we'll find out. So you barely want to touch that bottom line. Barely want to touch it. You want to do this in as few passes as you can. Or you want to do this in as few beads as you can. All right. So go ahead and clean this off. All right. So it's looking like this will probably be a 5-bead cap, so we'll see. We're going to go ahead and fire up again with the second bead. Again, the only really 2 things that people are going to look at is either your root or your cap. So you got to make sure to put time in those and make them look good. Because when you're taking a weld test, they're also looking at how nice it is too. Like out in the field, they want the welds to look nice, but if it's above flush, there's no lack of fusion, there's no undercut, they don't mind as much what it looks like. But your weld test, they're going to make sure it looks as good as possible. So make sure to take your time on your weld test cap. Okay, file, clean it off. Again, we're trying to do this as quick as possible. Okay, and again, we have our desk clean. Everything's in its right spot. Nothing's at our feet and keeping us from tripping up. So fire up with this 3rd bead. Again, I don't let it sit after the flush, and I don't turn my temperature down for the cap. I keep everything nice, hot, and liquid. Because if you can weld it without stopping, and if you can weld it without turning down your temperature, that's less chances of you getting porosity or lack of fusion, and also just it's welding faster. And that's what companies want. All right, that's the 3rd bead on this cap. And also I'm going to check to make sure everything's looking good and smooth. Okay, so we're going to put the 4th bead on here and try to catch as much as we can before we put our cap on. All right, so let's fire up. All right, we're moving pretty fast with this one. We don't have much to fill in, Now the cap is probably the only thing that I shake on a little bit just because I want it to look really, really good. So I'm a little bit nervous, and that's okay. As long as you just don't mess it up, a little bit of a shake in the stick rod is okay. All right. Go ahead and file that weld. Take that. So here we are on the bottom, coming up, this last bead on the cap. And we're moving pretty quick because it's filling up fast. We only had a little bit of a line to weld. Moving quick, making sure we don't get undercut or lack of fusion. And I'm watching behind the puddle to make sure that I'm not getting undercut. All right, that's the last bead on the cap on this left-hand side. I'm gonna look it over, make sure it looks good, and everything checks out. So that was a 5-bead cap on this left-hand side. So now I'm gonna go ahead and grind this bottom right here, make a little bit of a boat ramp, and then I'll start with my right-hand side. All right, guys, so now that I got my left-hand side done on the cap, sometimes you can just go ahead and tie into these welds on the left-hand side. I don't like to do that. I like to build a little bit of a boat ramp, and what that means is I'll transition these welds with my grinder and kind of make like a slope to it. That way, whenever I tie in with my right-hand side, it's smooth, it's congruent, and it looks like one continuous weld going around the pipe. All right. And we're going to tie into the boat ramp here, make it look really good. Again, this is the first bead on the cap. This is the most important bead on the cap because this bead right here will determine how straight and how nice your cap is going to be. And I'm barely touching that line, the very top of that bevel, which turns into pipe. And we are going to do a little bit of a circle when we get up here to this cap. Sweet. So that's the first bead on the cap. I'm going to take my file, look at everything, make sure that it is going to check out, and we are good. All right, doing a little bit of a circle here. Second bead on the cap, making sure that it's nice and tight to that first bead. Now when I'm welding pipe, I use a fixed shade lens. When I'm stick welding and TIG welding, having an auto darkening on a stick weld test will help you out a lot just because you don't have to do any guessing. Also, sometimes the auto darkening hoods will flash on you TIG welding, so I just alleviate that issue and always keep a fixed shade. And the guys here at WeldTube got great welding lenses for you to use and try out and just use on the job, okay? And again, we're watching behind the rod where we've been, turning my wrist and keeping that rod perpendicular with the pipe. Now sometimes you won't always get to take a weld test at a testing facility. There was one time I was on a job, well, going to a job, and the testing facility was closed on a Friday and I had to be on the job Monday. So what ended up happening was I get on the job site and have to take a job in the fab hooch. And that was a little bit nerve-wracking just because I was around people I didn't know. I had to get leads and stuff from the welding machines across the plant. So really, I wasn't supposed to be welding in the plant, but I was taking a weld test in the hooch. So that was a little bit nerve-wracking, and that may happen to you. All right. It's going good. Again, I like to put my hand on the rod for the bottom just to make sure everything's solid, and then I'll take my hand off and one-hand it just because it's a little bit more comfortable for me. I've been doing it for a while, but you can get there too. It just doesn't take too much time. Sweet. So that's the fourth bead on the cap. Take my file here. So hopefully you guys can see how fast it is with just using a file. If you're pipe welding, you don't need to clean all the passes and everything like that. That just takes more time. So all we got left is this last bead on the cap. So I'm gonna take my brush, kind of just clean it a little bit, nothing crazy. Blow it off, get the dust off of there. Okay, do a dry run. All right, we're gonna fire up. Nice and slow on this last bead on the cap, making sure everything's tied in. I'm focusing pretty hard right now. I want this to look as good as it can. All right, so that's the last bead on the cap. Take my file here, clean it off a little. Everything checks out. So now what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna take my wire wheel and clean this off. All right guys, hopefully this helped you to understand how I do my combo monster test. I use an 1/8 inch gap, 332 TIG wire for the root and the hot pass, and then I use 332 7018 to fill it and cap it. And I only use a file to clean it whenever I'm inside of the bevel. And then right before I cap it, I'll take my wire wheel and clean the whole thing off right before the cap. So hopefully you understand that doing these tests as quick as possible and with quality will help you to get out of that testing lab quicker, and also will help you to understand when you're on jobs, making welds quicker and as clean as possible will allow you to get on the job sooner. Companies and contractors are gonna love you because you're not milking welds.
Again, if you are not subscribed to our YouTube channel, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and also that like button as well. And if you want to stay up to date on our notifications, go ahead and click the bell button, because we upload videos every week that are very helpful for welders in the welding industries.